We have some new members this year, as we do most every year, but we have some new members. And Christopher, here he comes. He's going to assist me, or I'm going to assist him. Okay, where are you?
I know this one's here. Richard Earl Mangley Jr., descendant of Private Abel Durham.
You get on the other side, let me on this side. Okay, Chris, you got it. You get over here.
Craig Curtis Collins Young, descendant of Private Alexander Duncan.
I guess we have to stay over this one.
Clarence Warren Woods, descendant of Richard Villa.
Yep, come around, Chris. Well, Christopher, you come back this way. There you go. There we go.
I'll let both of these come up. Another father and son to Ashley here. Timothy Dean Giacquino and Michael Philip Giacquino. Descendant of Lieutenant States Gist.
Thank you, sir. Awesome.
And two more things. One of our younger members that we have here today, George Christopher Sinclair, descendant of Private Samuel Davey. George is also a new member of the National Society of Children of 1812, and as the Register General, I would like to present him with a certificate of membership, and we also have one for his sister Simone as well.
Excuse me, at this time I'm going to read the names of those departed members for this year. Reverend Lewis Wrights, James Satterfield, Davis Calvert, Francis Smith. O Lord, remember thy servants according to the favor which thou bearest unto thy people, and grant that, increasing in knowledge and love of thee, may go from strength to strength in the life of perfect service in thy heavenly kingdom, through our Lord. Amen.
Thank you. And we've lost a couple important, very important, all of our members are important. There's a couple that are very, very close to us. So let's remember them. Okay, now it looks like we're supposed to do President's Report. Mine's in the book. Highlights, we've done some grave markings with the daughters. Got to go up to Frederick and for the 125th anniversary of Francis Scott's Key Monument Memorial. Of course, we did Battle of North Point. I wasn't there, but I know we had some fellows there to represent us. And we did Defenders Day. We did the parade. For all those that were in the parade, thank you very much. Along with the daughters that were in the parade, the neighborhood down there really appreciates the parade, and I think we all had a good time. And then, let's see, what do we got? Treasurer. Gary, anything important to tell us?
Yes, as of the end of last year, we finally broke even in our stock market for where we were before COVID. 3%. So good news, and as you can see from the report, in the booklet, we have plenty of money, so we're good.
Let's buy a Tesla.
I don't know.
Registrar's report. Do we have a report from the registrar? Other than we have new members. What did he say?
In the book.
It's in the book. Genealogist report from Hank Peden, who of course was not here today, and that report is in the book. James, Dr. James, it's time for nominations.
You have a nominating committee list on page 13 of your program book. This has been a living, dynamic document, trying to arrange people where they can best serve and where they're most interested in serving. Anyway, the approach I'd like us to take would be to vote for a slate of nominees rather than by individual. And believe me, we've got some good people returning, the incumbents, and then we have some brand new people. So, starting at the top, we have Lou Giles at the front table here for president, David Hoover, who's been with us a long time, Bill Emmerich, who's also at the table, and Chris Smithson, who you've seen up here before. Chris is also serving as our corresponding secretary. We have an assistant corresponding secretary nominated, Craig C. Collins-Young. We have a recording secretary, which was Brian D. Alexander. We do not have someone filling the position of the assistant recording secretary. Treasurer is the enduring Gary R. Neal. We do not have an assistant, although we're working on that. We have a suspect that might take it. For Registrar J. Spencer Letzel, genealogist Hank Peden, historian William D. Johnson, who has done an excellent job. He's one of the incumbents you'll recognize. Assistant historian Robert T. Cummings, who has been taking a sort of a technology-oriented view of how to examine the history, particularly of 1812 in Baltimore. The judge advocate is Daniel Earnshaw. Assistant judge advocate Gerald Whitstadt. Surgeon Thomas W. Frank, which is a change from many years of having Lee Park as our primary surgeon. Lee is taking the role of assistant surgeon. Thomas W. Frank will be the lead, and we do listen to these people. They try to keep us healthy. Chaplain is open. This drove me crazy, and the committee crazy, trying to find a chaplain. And so that position's open, and we are continuing to look for someone that can serve properly in that. And our bylaws do not require that someone be a clergyman or woman or anything like that. But we do have an assistant chaplain, William F. Hoffman, who's by default going to have to fill in. Color Guard Commander, David Emery. Marshal, Sean Gilner. Webmaster, that will be filled by Brian Alexander also. And this man is so lucky, he's got the position of soon-to-be immediate past president. With that comes a designated job for you, Bill. 2 designated jobs. One will be chairing the nomination committee next year. And next will be, by our bylaws, you will be the VP General for Maryland to the General Society. I think you'll find the nominating committee far more challenging. We have directors. Many of these are returning because they served 3-year terms. The 22-25, Lawrence Price, Gerald Starr, Eugene Moyer. 23 to the 26 cohort, Jason Posey, who was one of our honor guard, who led the troop in. John C. Gilly and Fran Taylor, who's with us back there. Timothy DeQuino is one of the 24 to 27 cohort. Richard Mainley, also in that group, and Douglas Jimerson is also in that group. So at this point, I propose that we vote on this slate of officers, and anyone who would like to be involved in a vacant position, speak to me or one of our officers, and we'll see what we can do to backfill during the year. So at this point, I'm asking for a vote on this. A motion?
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed to the slate? Thank you very much.
All come forward and administer the oath.
Okay. At this point, we will get a crowd up here to be
All
sworn
the
in.
elected officers, please come up.
Office and take positions, and two-part matter. Wait till I get to the end before you respond. Do you pledge to support and advance the objectives of the Society of the War of 1812 in Maryland, as found in the preamble of our Society's Constitution? And do you also pledge to perform with fidelity the duties of the office to which you have been elected?
I do.
I do. All right, congratulations. Thank you for your service.
Right. I dubbed the Lou Giles. Hopefully it doesn't weigh as heavily on you as it has on me. And the official door knocker.
All right. Well, thank you, Bill. Good afternoon, everyone. Oops, I get this up. First, I'd like to say how honored I am to be the 67th president of this society. Certainly a society that has its roots going back to the year 1812. My ancestor, I think, would be extremely proud, but probably totally astonished at this happening. I'd like to thank today all of the officers and directors who have committed to their positions, who are reserving, and their commitment to this society. We really appreciate the effort there. And I particularly would like to thank Jim Schaub, who came out of retirement as the VP General to handle the nomination committee. So thank you, Jim. And I think most of all, I'd like to thank Bill Smithson, one of the most easygoing people I've ever had to work with, for his really progressive leadership for these past 2 years. One thing, though, that I did learn about Bill, and I should have learned it a lot sooner, is if you really want to communicate with Bill, don't use email, unless you send it to Sandy. The only way to really communicate with Bill's an old-fashioned guy. It's either phone or text, but email, forget it. Several members have really asked me what my priorities are going to be for the next year. And I think really I would say probably the same thing that every president has said, new president has said when they've taken over the office, and that is try to make sure this organization continues to thrive into the future. Certainly, we live in interesting times. This society was founded by a band of brothers who would gather together each year to celebrate their glory days in defeating the greatest Navy and Army in the world and protecting their families, their homes, and this city. And their society during those years faced great obstacles, many of the same obstacles that we face today. Really an aging membership, and people who, the war waned in people's mind as the years went forward from 1812. Yet the society, if you read the records, and I would emphasize Bob Cummings' book, if anybody has not read it, read that, but the society continued to change over the years to address those changing needs. Today, however, we have a change, I think, that those ancestors did not face, and that is modern information technology, which can be both a boon as well as a curse. Who would have thought, among all of us 3 years ago, that we would be meeting online virtually with Zoom? I mean, who would have thought that? It never happened in the last 200 years. And while this technology provides great advantages in allowing members who live all over this state to be able to virtually attend our meetings, something that was not available to our forefathers, yet it brings an issue which is potentially to degrade the face-to-face social interactions that have made this society so great over the years. But like it or not, society has changed. Even for this meeting, there were several members wondering how to pay for this event as they do not use checking, and they don't have checks anymore. This is something we have to address. And in looking at other societies, hereditary societies, as well as fraternal societies, it seems to me that we're a little bit behind the curve in comparison to those other folks. And so I think we can learn from them. Thus, what I intend to do is to create a new committee, which I'm calling a social media committee, that will investigate these issues and recommend actions and to take actions to address us moving into the future in that area. For example, how do we blend face-to-face meetings with modern online technology? How can we streamline our application process and dues process? And can we use our social media platforms to better recruit new members and meet our other goals? In conclusion, I'd like to say thanks to Bill one more time for reminding us of the importance of our partners. Fort McHenry, the Flag House, Todd's Inheritance, and our most important partner, the Daughters, whose mission is most identical to ours. We need to continue along this path, and who knows, in 20 or 30 years, we and the Daughters may be one organization. So with that, I thank you, and I guess we should continue, huh? We are ready for our speaker. Do we have? I have it. Do you have? A bio there. Okay, can you do that? You can have this back.
No, you can't. Okay. Tom, would you please come up? Let me see if... Tom McMillan. is our speaker today. Going to talk about his new book. Actually, I don't know if it's new. I think you have one since then now. No, it's still the new one. Okay.
It's still pretty new.
A lifelong student of history, Tom McMillan has served on the Board of Trustees of the Pittsburgh Heinz History Center, the Board of Directors of Friends of Flight 93, National Memorial, and the Marketing Committee of the Gettysburg Foundation. Our flag was still there. The story of the original Star-Spangled Banner is his fourth book about American history. He and his wife Colleen, who assist with much of the book research, this sounds like my family, are volunteers, ambassadors of the Antietam National Battlefield, and enjoy traveling in their retirement. They reside in Pittsburgh. So Tom, it's yours, and here's the little gizmo. You're supposed to turn it on somehow.
I got it. Thank you, Bill. I just want to thank my friend Bill Emmerich, who's a part of this. I actually met Bill on social media before I knew him. We were trading some information on some Fort McHenry stuff. So some good stuff can come from social media. I really appreciate that. It is very much an honor to be here. Now, when I normally give this book talk, which is not in Baltimore or Maryland, I have to spend a lot of time on the Battle at Fort McHenry, because most people outside of Baltimore or Maryland have no idea what happened. I mean, their story of this is there was a battle, Keith saw the flag, he wrote the song, "Oh, Say Can You See," end of story. With this group, I don't think I have to do that, so I'm going to tell a little bit of a different story. I'm going to focus on the two reasons I really wrote this book, which is, because there have been a lot of books on Fort McHenry, which is to delve into the story of the family and the flag. The Armistead family that defended and preserved this for almost 100 years, not just George, but several generations afterwards, and the flag and its journey to the Smithsonian, which took almost 100 years, and it's been there for about 100 years. There we have it today. I was just down there the other day. I'm assuming you've all been there. And it's a magnificent image, but you know, it's tattered, it's torn, it's really thin, a lot of holes in it. One of the stars is missing, 8 feet shorter than it used to be. You know, it used to be 30 feet by 42 feet. Now it's 30 feet by 34 feet. But part of the magic of it is the survival. And when they did the last major rehab, this about 15 years ago at the Smithsonian, the chief conservator said that they viewed the flag as a metaphor for the country. For all the challenges we face, the flag survives as the country survives. And that inspired them as they did their work, and it inspired me as I did this work. I thought it was a great line and a great motivation. Now, my interest in the Armistead family actually started from my study of a different war, from the Civil War. My wife and I also spent part of our time in Gettysburg. The movie Gettysburg came out in 1993, and it was based on a historic novel, so it's really romanticized. But there's some powerful scenes. There was one right before the start of Pickett's Charge where the Confederate General Lewis Armistead was talking to a British military observer, Arthur Freemantle. He'd been attached to the Confederate Army. And Freemantle says, "I understand you're from an illustrious military family." And Armistead's getting ready for this big attack. He has time for conversation. What'd they tell you? Freemantle says, "They tell me that your uncle was the commander of Fort McHenry in the War of 1812, and therefore was the guardian of the original Star-Spangled Banner." Freemantle looks across the field to Cemetery Ridge, where the Union troops are forming under American flags that Armistead is about to attack, and the Brit said, "I do appreciate the irony of it all." Really stuck with me. I said, one day I'm going to do a book on that. So that's kind of what led to this. Now, the first Armistead to set foot in what is now the United States was William Armistead in the year 1635. He and his wife Anne got a royal grant of several hundred acres in Gloucester County and Caroline County. Imagine the family tree today of someone who was here in 1635. There have to be tens of thousands. So I'm sure there are Armistead descendants who don't know they're Armistead descendants, because obviously when the ladies marry, you lose the surname. Just the amazing depth of this family. Early 1900s descendant did try to do a published genealogy, thousands of names in there. I was reading through it, used it as part of my research. Scott Sheaves directed me to it. There's obviously military background, but doctors and lawyers and university presidents, and 3 presidents of the United States. President William Henry Harrison, President Benjamin Harrison, President John Tyler, all descendants of the Armistead family. Lots of military background. The first military service I could find was the year 1680, when George Armistead's second great-grandfather was lieutenant colonel of the horse militia in Gloucester County, Virginia. Armistead man fought in all the early American wars. And then George Armistead and 3 of his brothers were professional U.S. Army officers in the War of 1812. 4 brothers from the same family. It's just kind of an astounding military legacy. So we're going to look at a little bit about that small wing of this family. The parents, I wish I had their photos, but I don't. The parents were John Armistead and Lucy Baylor, both from very prominent families during this era. John Armistead, a prominent planter, hundreds of acres in Caroline County. Also had a little bit of a military bent. He commanded a militia unit during the Revolutionary War, was a contemporary of George Washington, did some business with Washington, did not so well once. Washington actually filed a lawsuit against him, but eventually dropped it, but certainly knew who he was. And Lucy Baylor, the Baylor family also was very prominent. Her father, John Baylor, fought with Washington in the French and Indian War. Her brother, George Baylor, George, a name she would pass on to her son, was Washington's first aide-de-camp in the Revolutionary War, served alongside the general. And the Baylors also were noted for breeding horses. They would breed horses with those of Washington and Thomas Jefferson and other prominent people in the area. And that area in Caroline County has a legacy of great horse breeding. I was doing my research driving in. You see, those welcome signs, and it usually says birthplace of, I think, birthdays of George Armistead. Nope. Birthplace of Secretariat. The great racehorse Secretariat trumps our George Armistead. But on the field, there is the place where George was born, Newmarket Plantation, which was the Baylor Plantation, still exists. It's still an active farm, and they have a sign there, and there's a tombstone or two. And then on the 200th anniversary, they did put up a sign to our guy, George, alongside Newmarket Plantation where he was born. It's right off 95. If you're ever heading down to the beaches, it's easy to get to. So let's look at those 4 brothers. All you professional U.S. Army officers, not volunteers, professionals. Louis G.A. Armistead, the first Louis Armistead. G.A. stands for Gustavus Adolphus. He's named for the famed 17th century Swedish warrior. He's captain of a rifle unit killed in action, Battle of Fort Erie in 1814. Captain Addison B. Armistead commands coastal fortifications, South Carolina, dies of disease while on duty in 1813. So 2 of these brothers give their lives in the service of their country during that war. Walker Keith Armistead, 3rd man ever to graduate from West Point. He's a colonel during the War of 1812. 1818, he's named Chief Engineer of the U.S. Army. All those engineering graduates, West Point, he's Chief Engineer. 1828, he's a Brigadier General. In the 1840s, he actually commands all U.S. troops in the Florida Theater during the Second Seminole War. Quite military legacy. And then we have our guy, George. And this is an image that had descended from down in Florida sent to me. It's not the traditional George Armistead image. It's one that they sent, so I just thought I'd share that with you. Those folks down there are quite proud of what they have. George enlists when he's 19 years old in something called the Quasi-War with France. It really wasn't a shooting war. John Adams was worried there was going to be a war, so he called for enlistments, and these guys all enlisted. And he served all over the place. He was up in Canada. He was down in the Arkansas Territory. He came to Baltimore before the war, where he met his future wife, Louisa Hughes. Started the War of 1812. He's in New York Harbor. And then he's sent up to Fort Niagara, and that's where he really started to establish his legacy. Because as this group knows, the war didn't go very well for the U.S. in the first 2 years. One of the few successes was in the spring of 1813, Fort George on the Niagara River. And the artillery hero was George Armistead. And he did so well that he was given the honor of presenting captured British battle flags to President James Madison down in D.C. Madison's ecstatic. And he and his cabinet know, the war's not going to stay up in Canada. They're going to come down here. We have to start protecting our cities and our ports. And Baltimore, as we know, pretty decent sized city today. Back then, 3rd largest city in the country. Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore. Fort McHenry guards the bustling international harbor. It was going to be an important place. So they decide, with Armistead's history, they're going to put him in charge of Fort McHenry. Quirk of fate, because if he's not the hero up in the battle in Canada, maybe he doesn't get that position. Now he has, there's a lot of work to do. He has to increase recruiting. He has to improve physical defenses. And he did always have this thing for big flags, for the symbolism of flags, maybe even more important back then than it was now. There is the legendary mythical phrase that he said, "I need a flag so large the British can't help but see it from a distance." Walter Lord used that, an extensive quote in his book. The letter does not exist. I talked to Scott Shees. He said, "I don't think Walter Lord would have made it up, but we don't have the letter." But you can look at a person's background, and I checked in. There was a lot in Armistead's background that showed that big flags were something he really appreciated. 1802 at Fort Niagara, Armistead asked for a stand of colors 16 yards by 12 yards, 36 by 48. That's even bigger than the Star-Spangled Banner. And when he was at Fort McHenry before the war, he said, "I'm getting up a new flagstaff. It will be among the handsomest now standing." He asked for an officer for assistance in getting a new flag. So there's a lot of background here. So I think it's plausible, if he didn't utter those exact words, he wanted the big flag and might have said something like that, and it's a good story anyway. So just got a little background of that. Now, as we know, Mary Pickersgill makes the flag, and it really, I went to the Smithsonian a lot to do this research, and it would always irk me when I would see teachers with high school or grade school classes say, "Let's go in and see the Betsy Ross flag." Pickersgill doesn't roll off the tongue very easily, but Mary deserves her credit for that. And here's a point, where I'll just skip over the battle, and we'll get to after the battle, and sometime between 1814 and his death in 1818, George Armistead takes that flag down off the flagpole and takes it home as a souvenir. In complete violation of Army regulations. The family said it was given to him. There's no record of that. He took it home. Thank God he did that, because if he hadn't, it probably wouldn't exist today. History items sometimes don't become historic to us till 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years later. If it had stayed there, this flag probably would have continued to fly, and it would have weathered out. So the fact that he took it home is the main reason that exists today. He dies in 1818, and at that point, possession goes to his wife, Louisa Hughes Armistead. She will be the longest private owner of the flag, more than 40 years. 1818 to her death in 1861, and she guards it zealously. But it's not because of U.S. patriotism, especially in the early years, it's family patriotism. This was her husband's heirloom. It was important to him, therefore it was important to her and them. It doesn't make its first, at least recorded, appearance in public until 10 years after the battle, 1824, when the Marquis de Lafayette is making his grand tour of the U.S., the nation's guest, big events in New York and Boston and Philadelphia, and he comes to Baltimore, and Louisa allows him to bring the flag and fly it up the flagpole, and somebody makes a sign that says, "Welcome Lafayette to the land of the free and the home of the brave." Great story here in Baltimore, great image. But again, talking to Scott Shees and working with him in some of the archives at Fort McHenry, there aren't many documented instances that the flag was in public after that. Maybe 3, 4, 5 times, that's all. A couple of Defenders Days, obviously. One of the Armistead relatives was running for office. It was out there, but that's about it. But Louisa's partner in caring for this flag was her daughter, Georgiana, obviously named for her father, Georgiana Armistead, born at or near Fort McHenry in 1817. And they did a pretty good job with the knowledge of the time. But as this group knows, they did some things that we would consider sacrilegious today. They would cut off pieces of the flag and give them as souvenirs to battle veterans, maybe families for their caskets, local dignitaries, sometimes someone who just asked. And over the years, they cut away 8 feet. So when people go to the Smithsonian today, and they think that jagged edge is battle damage. That's the Armistead ladies cutting away the sides of the flag. Now, Louisa dies in 1861, just after the start of the Civil War, so by the terms of her will, the flag is bequeathed to her daughter, Georgiana. She knew her kids were going to fight over it, so she gives it to Georgiana. This is an image of her from the family. She's married at the time. Her married name is Georgiana Armistead Appleton. And this is where it gets interesting, because Georgiana and many of her family members are Confederate sympathizers. Her first cousin's a Confederate general. Not all that surprising in Maryland. It's a northern state, but it's a border state, slave state. Maryland sends troops to both the Union and the Confederacy. Lincoln administration was terrified Maryland was going to bolt and join the Confederacy. They were going to do everything they could to stop that. It would have changed the balance of power, and it also would have cut off Washington, D.C. from the rest of the North. So they took extreme measures, including suspending habeas corpus. You could arrest anybody you wanted and hold them for as long as you wanted. They arrested pro-Southern legislators, pro-Southern city officials, pro-Southern newspaper writers, even tried to prevent young men from leaving and joining the Confederate Army. At one point, they got a tip that some guys were going to get on a boat and go to Richmond. They arrested them, ran their names in the paper the next day. One of the names was George Armistead Appleton, Georgiana's son and the grandson of the hero Fort McHenry. He was going to be taken to a big Union prison, but that first night, where's he held? Armistead's grandson is held at Fort McHenry. And that part of the story gets a little better a week later when they arrest one of the most strident pro-Southern newspaper writers, Frank Key Howard. Frank Key Howard, the grandson of Francis Scott Key. He is taken that first night to Fort McHenry. And folks, he's taken there on September 13th, 1861. That is 47 years to the day that his grandfather saw the bombs bursting in air. He wasn't very happy. He wrote this angry piece. As I stood upon the very scene of that conflict, I could not but contrast my position with his. 47 years before, the flag which he had then so proudly hailed, I saw waving at the same place over victims of as vulgar and brutal a despotism as modern times have witnessed. This guy was angry. And 5 of his brothers, so 5 other Key grandsons were Confederate soldiers, including one with the very eerie name of McHenry Howard. And McHenry Howard was a staff officer for Stonewall Jackson and other Confederate generals. Now, during this time, the Armistead ladies do protect the flag. Again, it's not out of U.S. patriotism, family patriotism, but at least they did it, because imagine what would have happened if Confederate activists had gotten that flag. We would not have it today. Now, the war ends and country comes together, but 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you don't hear much at all about the Star-Spangled Banner. It's kind of faded into oblivion until this man, little known to history, brings it out of the shadows. That's Commodore George Preble, lifelong Navy man. He's written a book on the history of the U.S. flag. One thing he can't figure out is what happened to that original Star-Spangled Banner from Fort McHenry. He's heard it might be with some Armistead descendants, but he believes something he read somewhere, that soldiers were through the fort in the late 1850s, saw a big flag rolled up in the corner collecting dust. He says that is the Star-Spangled Banner. Well, that brings Georgiana Armistead Appleton out of the woodwork. She writes him an angry, "How dare you" letter. "How dare you, sir? It's my father's flag. It was in my possession." Preble's like, whoa. But they write back and forth for a while, and Georgiana starts to get her head turned by this military guy from Boston has an interest in her flag. Preble says, "Has it ever been photographed?" "No." "Well, if you send it to me here at the Boston Naval Yard, I'll take a photograph and send it to you." So after all these years, she puts it in a crate, sends it to Boston. He's fired up. He's going to take it up, fly up a flagpole, gets it out. Oof. It's pretty weak. It's 60 years old. It needs a backing. He's in the Naval Yard. They have ship sails. He gets an old ship sail and has some men sew a ship sail to the flag. And this is the first photo ever taken of the Fort McHenry flag in 1873. You can see the damage, the star missing. He had this presence of mind to put a soldier there, so we see the context of how big it is. But it also looks backwards. It looks like it's backwards. It is backwards. For reasons we'll never know, those guys inadvertently sewed the sail to the front of the flag. So this flag is displayed backwards for more than 100 years. People call me not a patriot on social media, like they don't understand this story. So that's just kind of the story behind the story of that part of it. Now, Preble has it for a couple more years, a couple events in Boston, but it's still gaining no notoriety. In 1876, Georgiana says, "I want my flag back." She's now living in New York City with another son, a New York City stockbroker. And when she dies in 1878, by the terms of her will, the flag goes to him, to Ebenezer Stewart Appleton. Ebenezer, pretty good name for this guy. He's pretty much of a Scrooge. I mean, look at him. He's prim, he's proper, he's not going to be a good PR person. And he gets deluged with requests. He doesn't want to do any of them, but there's one he feels he has to. Baltimore in 1880 is putting up a statue to his grandfather. He brings the flag, rides in a parade. Key's granddaughter is there. Some elderly veterans are there. Great time. But he gets back to New York. Again, this is 1880. Says, that's it. Puts it in a private vault. No one outside the family sees it for 27 years. Not that they didn't try. Baltimore City Fathers are back on the 75th anniversary, 1889. Hey, can we have the flag for Fort McHenry? Nope. So they go over his head. They write a letter to the Secretary of War in D.C. and they say, you know, This isn't really George Armistead's flag. He took it. It's government property. There's no record you gave it to him. You should get it back. Secretary says, we did the research and you're right, but possession is 9/10 of the law. And Ebenezer also uncharacteristically does a PR campaign, invites some New York reporters to his house, holds up a portrait of his grandfather and says, does this look like the face of a guy who would steal government property? And then he gives them this quote, the government does not own the flag, and they're demanding it, I think, would equal any despotic notion displayed by the Tsar of Russia. I will loan it where and to whom I please, I will protect it as long as I live, and leave it in good hands when I die. No one's getting the flag. But early 20th century, Ebenezer's getting into his 60s. He's getting tired of this. He's thinking of donating it, ironically, maybe to the city of Baltimore, maybe state of Maryland. But then a cousin who has a government job down in D.C., James Baylor, from the Baylor wing of the family, says, you know, there's this relatively new National Museum, the Smithsonian. And Ebenezer's National Museum. Really takes only a couple of letters. He loans the flag to them in 1907. You can do that. You retain ownership, but you loan it for a number of years. First day there, summer of 1907, the Smithsonian hangs it from the side of the original Smithsonian building, the castle. That building is still there today. It's the visitor center. This is that photo. It's published in papers around the country, and this is really the first time that most Americans know that the flag from Fort McHenry actually exists. It touches off a surge of patriotism, surge of visitation. Smithsonian was overjoyed, and Eben is so pleased that he makes the gift permanent in 1912 with one stipulation. It will never leave the Smithsonian. Because he knew people would ask, especially those people from Baltimore, and he wants it to stay there. So the Smithsonian agrees. 2 years later, in 1914, I think just coincidentally on the 100-year anniversary, the Smithsonian's looked at the flag. We better do something with this. The leading flag preservation expert in the country at the time was a lady from Boston named Amelia Fowler. She gets the contract with her 10 needlewomen, that's what it said in the contract, and they're working on the flag. There they are in what is now the visitor center. They conclude that the sail itself is causing damage. It's too heavy, so they want to remove it and replace it with much lighter, fine Irish linen. But to do that, using the methodology of the time, they attached that linen with 1.7 million stitches. One of the ladies at Smithsonian told me, I can't believe they put 1.7 million stitches on our flag, but that was the methodology. They also put it on the wrong side, but it did preserve the flag for about 90 years. Now, was Ebenezer Appleton's edict that it never leave the Smithsonian, was that ever violated? Only once, during World War II. 1942, not long after Pearl Harbor, we're worried about some of our items, maybe more attacks. So items from Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, Star-Spangled Banner are taken to a warehouse in rural Virginia, and they remain off campus for about 2 years. Return in 1944, we think things are safe, and the Star-Spangled Banner has been on display every day since then in some way, shape, or form to the American public. But 1960s, it's getting a little cluttered. A lot of stuff, I don't want to say junk because everything's purported, but a lot of stuff around it. And no one's actually seen the full flag since that 1907 photo. It's in a big case, 16 feet high, but the flag's 30 feet high. It's folded. You only see 8 stripes. They decide we better make a museum just for American history, the National Museum of American History. And it's going to be built around the Star-Spangled Banner. Flag Hall was and is on the 2nd floor. This is the way the flag was displayed for about 30 years from the 60s to the 90s. This is the way I first saw it. It's dramatic, and they artificially filled in the stripes and the star, but you could tell it were the original parts. And they would have presidential inaugural balls and big speeches here, and they would check on it occasionally. It was pretty well protected, but they would find dust and dirt and threads from people's blue jeans. They thought, we better get another panel together and preserve this for the long term. So they do late 90s. With a multi-year, multi-million-dollar plan to preserve this flag, hopefully forever. It's going to take 8 years. They decide that they're going to do their work, though, in front of the American public. Because so if you come in those 8 years, you can still see at least part of the Star-Spangled Banner. First thing they had to do was remove those 1.7 million stitches, one by one. The ladies hovering over the flag, they couldn't lean on it, kneel on it, touch it, obviously. It took them 10 months. The chief conservator, Suzanne Thomason Krause, did such a great job. She said one day she's working on it, she looks up, she sees a multi-generational family, older man, seems to be World War II era. Doesn't think of it, goes back to her work, looks up, about 30 seconds later, he's standing at attention saluting her. And she said, you know, when you were doing this for 5 or 6 hours and your shoulder hurts and your knee hurts and your back hurts, that's why you're doing it. You're doing it for the American public. And the new display opens in 2008. You go through a darkened chamber and you get some history of Key and the White House and the battle and the flag and the family, and then you walk around and you see the flag. And it really stuns you to silence. I've seen it a lot of times. It just stuns me every time I see it. You'll see military veterans dabbing at their eyes. It's out there once, of all the people who had to work together over the years, couldn't have known each other over the centuries, that were a part of making sure that this flag was still there. From George Armistead, who thought of it, defended it, Louisa Georgiana, who protected it those early years, Commodore Preble brings it out of the shadows, Ebenezer Appleton, who despite his cantankerousness, does the right thing, gets it to the Smithsonian, Amelia Fowler, her rehab work, Suzanne Thomason Krause and those conservators from 15 years ago, to the modern curator, Jennifer Jones. I mean, it's because of those people working together over the centuries that we can know that our children and our grandchildren and many generations off in the future can go to the Smithsonian and say, our flag is still there. Thank you. Thank you very much.